Hallelujah. Hallelujah. A great prophet has arisen in our midst, and God has visited his people. Hallelujah. 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 The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. At that time, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman of that district came and called out, "Have pity on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not say a word in answer to her. His disciples came and asked him, "Send her away, for she keeps calling out after us." He said in reply, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But the woman came and did him homage, saying, "Lord, help me." He said in reply, "It is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Please, Lord, for even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the table of their masters." Then Jesus said to her in reply, "O woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed from that hour. The Gospel of the Lord. Notice in this Gospel today, the woman says, "Have pity on me, Lord." Right? Guess what that is in Greek? Kyrie eleison me, Domine, right? So where we get Kyrie eleison at the Mass, right? It's a reflection of what this woman would have said to Jesus, speaking in Greek, which was the common language of that time. Come back to this woman. It's kind of an interesting question, obviously, that comes up whenever you have this gospel passage. Why was Jesus so cold to this woman in the beginning? Right? And part of the answer actually comes from the first reading. That's why the church asks us to read this gospel passage with this reading from Jeremiah. So as we spoke about yesterday, right, Jeremiah prophesied right before, during, and after the exile, as we've been talking. He was living in Jerusalem, and right around chapter 30 of the prophet Jeremiah is when the temple was destroyed and everybody started being carried off into exile. Right? And so the people finally acknowledged that everything had been lost. There had been many false prophets who had been trying to say that nothing was going to happen, that even though the Babylonians were coming in, the exile was not going to be very long, and Jeremiah kept contradicting that message. But at this point in the book of Jeremiah, right, the people have finally accepted the reality that everything is lost. So this is the part of the prophet Jeremiah where he begins to give prophecies of restoration to the people of Israel. This was first fulfilled 70 years later. Jeremiah famously said that 70 years after the Babylonians came in, the Babylonians would be taken over by somebody else, which was fulfilled in history. The Medo-Persians came in, and they actually allowed the Israelites to come back to Jerusalem, and they were able to rebuild the temple, although it was not as glorious as it had been before. So it was primarily filled there, but as we've spoken about before, many times prophecies in the Old Testament, they have multiple fulfillments. Right? So it was first fulfilled 70 years after the Babylonians came in, but then even in a greater way, it was fulfilled in the days of Jesus. Right? And that's what Jeremiah is primarily speaking about today. This is the part of Jeremiah's prophecy where he preaches about the reunion of the people of Israel. Right? So he speaks about the people in Samaria and the people in Ephraim. You guys know what that means because you've been paying attention over the readings this summer. Right? Samaria and Ephraim is another word for the northern part of Israel, where the people fled to in the north when they had their civil war. Ephraim, it's called sometimes because Ephraim was one of the sons of Joseph. And Joseph, his descendants, moved into the north. That was actually part of the big debate that happened between the northern and southern parts of Israel. If you remember in the book of Genesis, Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, who was the father of the 12 sons, right, who became later on the 12 tribes of Israel, a debate arose because when Jacob was dying, he blessed Joseph, giving him the blessing of the family. But then right after that, he also blessed Judah. So it was kind of confusing. Did the blessing last with Joseph and his descendants, or with Judah? And that kind of played out throughout salvation history. The southern part of Israel, those were the descendants of Judah, whereas the people in the north were the descendants of Joseph. So when you're reading the prophetical books, when you see the words Samaria or Ephraim or Manasseh or Israel, right, those are all references to the northern part of Israel, whereas the southern part is referred to as Judah or Jerusalem. Right? So Jeremiah here is prophesying about the fact that one day all of those tribes would be reunited. There would no longer be division in God's people. And this was fulfilled in Jesus with his 12 apostles, but also in a mysterious way, according to the Bible, right? It's fulfilled in the church. Many scholars point this out in the book of Revelation. Then in the book of Revelation, when John is taken up, he sees 24 elders, right, offering sacrifice in the heavenly sanctuary. And as many scholars point out, and many church fathers have claimed, right, the number 24 is the number 12 times 2. Right? So basically, it's like the fullness of Israel on earth combined with the fullness of Israel in heaven. Kind of in a mysterious way, that all those years, the people of Israel were divided into two camps. That in the church, we have the church triumphant in heaven, united with the church militant on earth. And sure enough, they come together every time we have Mass, right? The church militant here on earth is joined with the church triumphant in heaven. Again, Jeremiah kind of mysteriously alludes to this. He says, the people from Samaria, even the people from Ephraim, they will say, "Rise, let us go to Zion, to the Lord our God." In the days of Jeremiah, Zion would have simply referred to the mountain in Jerusalem where the temple was. But in the days of the church, we recognize that that Temple Mount in Jerusalem, where the temple was originally built, was a mere foreshadowing of the heavenly temple, the heavenly Jerusalem, heavenly Zion. So Jeremiah in this prophecy is prophesying that one day the tribes will be united and everyone will say, "Let us go to Zion," right? The mount of the living God. In a mysterious way, that's what happens every time we have Mass. The people from all over the world come together to say, "Rise, let us go to God's mountain, Mount Zion," which we experience in the church. That's why the sanctuary is always elevated in churches. Again, it's supposed to call to mind this image of Mount Zion, that the sanctuary where the sacrifice of the Mass takes place is in an elevated location because we are truly taken up to heaven in the Mass.